Love Yours, an experimental podcast. Welcome back to another episode of Love Yours. I'm your host, Charlotte Chidera, and this is season 3, episode 8. In this season, we are reading Chidera Eggerue's What a Time to Be Alone, the Slumflower's Guide to Why You Are Already Enough. And oh my gosh, we're almost there. This book has been so amazing, like honestly. I couldn't have picked a better book for this time in my life. So thank you so much to my girl who recommended this to me, because honestly, it's helping me do the work, for real. So if you're listening, I hope you're also reading along. Hope you've got your copy, and I hope it's helping you too. Let me know, I'd love to hear how it's helping you and the combination of reading and listening, what impact that's happening on your thought process. So last episode we was talking about the want for love and why it's okay, why we shouldn't feel ashamed about wanting love. And talking about feeling ashamed, I feel like this brings us on to the next few pages. So Chidera says that love and pride is like oil and water. They will never mix. Honestly, I couldn't agree more. From my couples therapy to my failed relationships with all my core shakers. And I say failed, I should more say ended relationships, because it's not that they were complete failures, they just didn't last the test of time. I think the most common thing that all of my core shakers have is a massive ego and too much pride. There was only one core shaker who I feel like didn't let their pride and ego get in the way of our relationship. There's one who post-relationship accepted that's what their problem was. But generally, none of them really would like to admit that. And none of them, I think, even to now, are aware of how much their pride got in the way of our relationship. So Chidera talks about withholding vulnerability because your pride is more important. What is it? And do you know what? I would like to say that this is a very masculine trait, but I've also dated women who have this similar mindset. And it's so weird because in reality, shouldn't you be able to be the most vulnerable with your other half of anyone else in the world? They should be seeing you at your most vulnerable, authentic self. But for some reason, and remember, I told you my core shakers, the shortest time I was with any of them was 2 years. Even with those serious core shaker relationships, they just weren't able to be vulnerable with me. It's scary to think, is that because of me? Is that because of my tough love fixer mentality that they didn't feel like they were comfortable enough to be vulnerable? I don't know. I'd have to go back and ask them. And I mean, they're not going to answer for the sake of this podcast, but it's sad. Chidera says that pride is the product of fear. And that makes sense because I feel like they were scared. They were scared of how deeply they felt for me. They were scared of if I was going to receive what they were telling me well, because of how sassy I can be and how blunt I can be. And I think most importantly, they were scared of their own truth. We talked about this in a previous episode. Be honest with yourself. Even if you can't be vulnerable with your core shaker or your casual, at least be honest with yourself. I've had to learn that the hard way, how messed up it can feel when you're not honest with yourself. So I know where the pride comes from, but I don't know if the fear is linked to me personally or their own issues. I guess that one I'll just be spinning in my head forever. But Chidera makes a bold statement that I actually agree with. If someone has more pride than vulnerability, they are probably not able to love you properly. I can speak so confidently that my most recent core shaker, 100%. To the point I found out things post breakup that I'm like, wow, how was this happening in your life? And I didn't know about it. And you was my core shaker. And it goes back to, and we talked about this on a previous episode, how people treat you is a reflection of how they feel about themselves. Of course they're not able to love you properly. They're not even able to accept their own demons, accept their own vulnerability. And sometimes this doesn't just play out in core shakers. Sometimes it also happens with the casuals. I've definitely been through this recently with the mixed signals. Chidera labels them as a prelude to manipulation. I really like to think I'm the tough girl and I will never get hurt or manipulated, but yeah, even tough girls get it. Even tough guys get it. Honestly, they're the prelude to manipulation. Chidera goes on to say that indecisive behaviour usually means no. And we should very much have a mentality that if you don't want me now, don't check for me later. I definitely know that whenever I've been indecisive in life, it's because I don't really want to do it, but I'm trying to make justifications as to why I should be doing it or I should want to do it. So that does make sense that it means no, especially when it comes to how you feel about someone. We even spoke about that on episode 6 about not forcing things and letting things run their season. I don't know how I feel about the mindset of if you don't want me now, don't check for me later. I would definitely say that's how I used to feel, but I think with my most recent casual, what I'm realizing is that I wish I hadn't been so strong and firm in my decisions because I actually just miss the day-to-day interactions. And maybe that just links back to the mixed signals, and I feel like I was slightly love-bombed a little bit where it was so intense, it was so full-on. And I know that the lack of accountability from this casual is a massive red flag and reminds me of previous core shakers that obviously didn't work out. So maybe I do need to take that message from Chidera that if they don't want me now, don't try to come for me later. What, because I'm looking extra shiny now? Because I've been in the gym? Oh, leave me alone. Chidera even stresses that if you're waiting for a person to make their mind up about you, this is life's push notification telling you it's time to work on your self-confidence. Honestly, why are we waiting around for these people? And I say we because I mean me too. I don't know about you, but my life is so full that it actually annoys me when I act like this because I know I could easily just carry on with my day and it would be still a very full, fun life. But I guess this plays back into last week's episode that I do just want love, and so maybe I just cling on to that little hope too hard sometimes with the wrong people. And apparently, people who give you mixed signals love to remain unpredictable, so you rely dependent on them and it can stroke their ego. She just stresses, as the book title says, get over the fear of being alone. Get over it, Sharla. Get over it. It must be a fear. I wouldn't have described it as a fear, but it must be a fear because my head is telling me that I made the right decision to cut off this casual, but my heart, and I'm not saying I was in love with him, it was way too soon to be loved, but it was really strong chemistry, compatibility, lust, butterflies. The rose-coloured glasses were fully on. Here I was cussing Lana from Love Island. Don't judge me. Don't at me. And it's so fitting because the next thing Chidera goes on to talk about is empty apologies and empty promises, which was the main reason I ended it with this casual. They kept saying they was going to do certain things and didn't follow through. And that really hurt my feelings because I don't say things I don't mean, as you could probably tell from listening to this show. So Chidera says apologies are invalid without changed behaviour. It's that whole fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, fool me a third time, well damn. But I really don't feel like people change. None of my core shakers did. In fact, all the problems I had with my core shakers that ended us eventually were all there in the beginning. So that's why I really need to start paying more attention to these flags because the flags don't go away. In fact, they just get bigger. This also plays back into something I talked about on a previous episode this season about dating for potential. Chidera says that kind-hearted people fall for the idea of the person or the gesture before they've even come through with it. That is me, down to a T. And then there's a series of quotes that I just feel like we haven't done this yet. I haven't directly quoted from the book, and these are all very strong that I want you to take with you. I'm not even going to give my opinion on it because I just want you to hear what Chidera has to say. So, stop hanging out with people who talk over you in group conversations. They do not respect you. Stop hanging out with people who love to dump their problems on you while making no room to listen to yours. Stop hanging out with people who change the way they treat you when they're around people they want to suck up to. Stop hanging out with people who only support you when it benefits them. Stop hanging out with people who you show up for and support, but when it's your turn, they have an excuse ready every time. Stop hanging out with people who also hang out with people who don't like you. As much as it's possible to be civil, it's near impossible to remain neutral between enemies. Stop hanging out with people who only invite you to events to make themselves look good. Stop hanging out with people who conceal their friendship with you because of what their other friends may think. Stop hanging out with people who only appear in your life to find out how they can better themselves and then disappear. Stop hanging out with people who constantly go out of their way to hang out with people they swear they don't like. Stop hanging out with people who think it's cool to trick other people. Manipulation of people's feelings isn't anything to be proud of. Stop hanging out with people who keep flaking on you without making the effort to rearrange plans. They don't care about you or your time. Stop hanging out with people who don't know how to be honest with themselves. They will never be honest with you either. Stop hanging out with people who make you feel embarrassed about things you're passionate about. Stop hanging out with people who love to talk you out of your ambitions but hide behind playing devil's advocate. Stop hanging out with people who ditch you when you are in a dark and lonely place mentally. They were never your friends to begin with. Stop hanging out with people who make jokes out of your insecurities and when you feel offended, tell you that you can't take a joke. Stop hanging out with people who tell you of malicious things said about you behind your back, but not what they said in response to them. Honestly, the list of people we shouldn't be hanging out with is insane. And even just, I've already read it, but even just rereading through that list, it really hammers home why my circles are so small now. There's not one of those statements that don't relate to one of my relationships, whether that's a colleague, a friend, a family member, or a romance, course shaker, casual. In every area of my life, I've had people who are those people I just listed. It's actually ridiculous because reading it just sounds like common sense. But when you're in it, common sense sometimes is far away, you know. Feelings really take over common sense a lot of the time. So I really challenge you to go through that list of people you should stop hanging out with and make a little list under each of those statements of who falls into those categories. And then take some time to assess those relationships. Are they worth it? Can you talk to them about it? Or is their pride way too big? I feel like the overall theme for this episode is pride and why it does not mix with love. Sometimes your pride will stop you addressing those people too, because you just don't want to deal with it, because it's just easier to cut them off or to make an assumption about them. So I feel like this episode is definitely a combination of love and pride. And if you feel like you've got someone in your life who cannot be vulnerable with you, no matter what the circumstances, chances are their pride is blocking the blessing that is your relationship. And until they get out their own way, it's not going to be easy for you. But I'm going to leave it there. So thank you again so much for listening, following along. Don't forget to share, subscribe, assess who's got that pride, because it's not going to mix with your love. And I'll talk to you on the next episode. Love Yours, an experimental podcast